Hello my bookish friends out there in booktube land, and welcome to a very exciting episode of Tristan and the Classics, because in this episode we're looking back at how to read a book, and our focus in this is learning to analyse how books start, the opening 2 paragraphs. And in this we're specifically to get an idea of tone and building atmosphere and drawing us into a story. We're going to look at just one style. I'll do more of these videos, but by looking at one author only, we begin to see how style and tone is crafted by a person. And we're going to be looking at a number of Charles Dickens books, just how he opens them, because he is a master at creating atmosphere and quick backdrop that gets you engaged very, very fast. So we're going to look at a bunch of these. Go and get a coffee and follow along, because what's going to happen, I'm going to put on the screen the actual writing and we're going to read through it together, and you could really enjoy this. Save this video. So without further ado, let's dig in, shall we? So the first excerpt that we're going to look at is the first 2 paragraphs of Dickens' most widely read book, which is Great Expectations. And just look for the way that he creates a tone in this. He's got a particular style, but Dickens is exceptionally good at creating tone for a story, setting an atmosphere for you to relax into. So we'll just read this. If you can hear traffic, by the way, I've got my window open and I'm upstairs at the moment, so you hear more noise. My father's family name being Pirrip, and my Christian name Philip, my infant tongue could make of both names nothing longer or more explicit than Pip. So I called myself Pip, and came to be called Pip. I give Pirrip as my father's family name on the authority of his tombstone and my sister, Mrs. Joe Gargery, who married the blacksmith. As I never saw my father or my mother, and never saw any likeness of them either, for their days were long before the days of photographs, my first fancies regarding what they were like were unreasonably derived from their tombstones. The shape of the letters on my father's gave me an odd idea that he was a square, stout, dark man with curly black hair. From the character and turn of the inscription, also Georgiana, wife of the above, I drew a childish conclusion that my mother was freckled and sickly. To 5 little stone lozenges, each about 1.5 feet long, which were arranged in a neat row beside their grave, and were sacred to the memory of 5 little brothers of mine, who gave up trying to get a living exceedingly early in that universal struggle, I am indebted for a belief I religiously entertained that they had all been born on their backs with their hands in their trousers pockets, and had never taken them out in this state of existence. Now this is a charming opening. What do you get? What do you pick up from this first 2 paragraphs? There's whimsy in it. Now, how does he get the whimsy? Well, actually, it's sort of through naivety. For instance, he decides he wants to give us an introduction to his family, as if this is the proper thing to do. And it's very much like a child introducing themselves. You know, hello, my name is Philip Pirrip, okay? But he tells us this word here, infant tongue. So we've got a childishness introduced, and he can't make sense of his name. He can't say Philip Pirrip. He's too little, so his tongue gets tied up, and he just says, I can't say anything more explicit than Pip. So he can't go much further than just a simplified version of his name. We're getting given an infancy straight away, which adds to a whimsy. The infancy also adds to a naivety inside the writing. And then we get this, look at this, 3 pips here, okay? Now, that's not an accident. When we've got Philip, Pirrip, Philip, Pip, 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 it gives us an almost lyrical nursery rhyme sound about Pip's introduction. And so it sort of engenders in us a little wry smile of a youngster. Now, being as Great Expectations is a Bildungsroman, so it starts with him as being a little child and growing up. This is an unbelievably excellent opening line, or 2 lines, I should say. But it doesn't stop there, because look at how he decides how he knows things. It says, I give my Pirip as my father's name on the authority of his tombstone. Now, he could have said on the authority of his sister straight away, which would have been more normal. But the tombstone is significant to Pip here. He learns from those little things around him. He has a very limited grasp of knowledge. He hasn't experienced much because he's little. And he's gone and seen the tombstone at the church. And that's given him his father's name for certain because it's written down. You know, so like a little one impressed. If it's on writing, it must be true. Then he tells us, I never saw my father or mother, so we've got an orphan, and maybe a lack of influence and a simplicity about his approach, just believing of everybody rather than straight from his mum and dad. And he never saw a picture of them. That just gives us a time period, which is quite clever for setting the scene in the back. And then it says, his first fancies. A fancy is not a fact, is it? It's an idea, an image, an imagination that's come to his mind. It's a fancy to what his parents might have looked like. Look at this word. We're given unreasonably. Unreasonably derived from their tombstones. So we get this word tombstone again twice. This tells us a little bit. It's setting a scene that the tombs or the church must be nearby where he lives. We've got this repetition. It seems that he goes to the church. And in the next paragraph, we'll see that's exactly what he does, because that's where he first meets the criminal. And then look at how he describes his father. He describes him as a square, stout, dark man with curly black hair. How could he possibly know? Because this is the days before photographs. Well, it says his idea comes from the tombstone. And then he says the shape of the letters. So in other words, the font. The style of inscription in the stone is, to him, makes his father stout and square with curly black hair. And in fact, it's the inscription again, so the calligraphy of the stone writing, which says also Georgiana, wife of the above, so his mother. He thinks that she's freckled and sickly. And not only that, he then sees the 5 stone lozenges. This is interest. A lozenge, sort of a sweet, isn't it? Or a tablet of his day. He compares the tombstones to what he knows in his little small life. He doesn't say tombstones or grave tops for his brothers. He says lozenge. And then he just says, I am indebted for a belief I religiously entertained that his brothers were born with their hands in their trousers pockets. Well, that's interesting. Babies aren't born with trousers on, are they? But in his little mind. So what we've got is a naivety, a simplicity of existence, a willingness to believe things on face value. And that is a brilliant setup for the character of Pip, because as we see him grow, he sees a lot by face value. His naivety never fully disappears, even when he thinks he's become more sophisticated. And that's the challenge that Dickens sort of throws down to all of us, that to a large degree our life is lived with the naivety of a child's view. But what a beautiful way to open up a book. Just 2 paragraphs, and we have an absolute understanding of the perspective of our main character and the world he inhabits, which is very, very small. It happens to be the blacksmith, at the blacksmith's house. And the first number of chapters only exist at the blacksmith's. His world is tiny. Isn't that just fabulous writing? How to start an atmosphere. And Dickens is especially good at atmospheric introductions. So let's move on to another one to see his style and his tone again. So now we're looking at Bleak House, an absolutely fabulous book by Dickens. Let's just read this. This is the first paragraph. We'll read this, and I won't tell you anything about the book until afterwards. See what you pick up. London. Michaelmas term lately over, and the Lord Chancellor sitting in Lincoln's Inn Hall. Implacable November weather. As much mud in the streets as if the waters had but newly retired from the face of the earth, and it would not be wonderful to meet a megalosaurus 40 feet long or so waddling like an elephantine lizard up Holborn Hill. Smoke lowering down from chimney pots, making a soft black drizzle with flakes of soot in it as big as full-grown snowflakes, gone into mourning, one might imagine, for the death of the sun. Dogs, undistinguishable in mire. Horses scarcely better, splash to their very blinkers. Foot passengers jostling one another's umbrellas in a general infection of ill temper, and losing their foothold at street corners where tens of thousands of other foot passengers have been slipping and sliding since the day broke, if the day ever broke, adding new deposits to the crust upon crust of mud, sticking at those points tenaciously to the pavement and accumulating at compound interest. Now, what's wonderful is the second paragraph in this book continues in that vein, but starts focusing on the fog instead of mud. You could go and read that yourself and apply what we're about to do to that. What tone is this setting? What was your first thought when you looked at it? Well, probably it's a dirty street. We get that because we've got this mud in the streets, as if the waters are newly retired from the earth. There's a reference to the scriptures when God made the earth and the waters retreated. But if you've seen water retreat, it leaves mud everywhere. You wouldn't be surprised to find a megalosaurus, sort of an elephantine lizard, as it says. So it's almost primeval. It's that muddy. It's not, it's not a pleasant place to be. It's not a sophisticated, high-end area that we're talking about. Smoke lowering down from chimney pots. Now, smoke can occasionally be it could be romantic smoke, but not here. Not when you use this word, lowering. Because lowering, you think of lowering the light. You think of clouds that lower down. It always causes a darker environment. So we've got mud, smoke, darkness from chimney pots. We've got no stained glass windows. We've got no beautiful doorways, chimney pots, which would have been black. And that's, again, what it says here. Look at this, black drizzle. Drizzle, so we've got a rainy day. Then we've got flakes of soot. Okay, flakes, like it's snowing. As big as full-grown snowflakes. And then it says this, gone into mourning. So grief, going to a funeral for the death of the son. Dogs undistinguishable in mire and mud. We've got those. Again, all dirtiness. Horses scarcely better, splashed. This is in a wrong sense. Splashed to the very blinkers, because they're scarcely better than the dogs in mire. So it's not water that's splashed, it's mire. Foot passengers jostling one another. There's two things about this statement that I love. Foot passengers. Imagine walking in the mire and the mud. Okay, imagine having the snowflakes of soot, dark, with mourning, the loss of the sun falling upon you. What a bleak existence. So it's the foot passengers, not those going around in coaches. And then it says they jostle. So it's uncomfortable. They're jostling, it's crowded, they're bumping, they're upset. And it says that a general infection of ill temper. What a deliberate use of words this is. He could have said jostling one another's umbrellas with ill temper, so angry. But this is an infection. This sort of gives us some almost slum-like typhus outbreak section of London, where the poor live, where people whose lives are drab and running out and worthless, meaningless exist. That's what you get. Do you see how he set a tone? Because, well, we'll just finish. They lose their foothold. Where tens of thousands of foot passengers, we've got this foot again, tens of thousands, it's crowded. Okay, and it's like the morass of mankind passing through this dirty area, slipping and sliding since the day broke, if the day ever broke. So it's dark. Comes back to this smoke lowering. These two match each other. There's darkness, if the day ever broke. The death of the sun. You see that? All of this in one paragraph. And then new deposits to crust upon crust of mud. Lovely little poetic device there, crust upon crust. We've got that alliteration sticking at those points tenaciously to the pavement. You can't remove it. Tenacious. It's permanently here in this environment, in this neighborhood, this ugly, glum existence is a permanent feature. And then the last, most interesting phrase, which can't be an accident, is this: accumulating at compound interest. What an extraordinary phrase. Instead of dealing with people, instead of saying that the mud is deposits of crust upon crust, like an avalanche building up, like the rising of a tide, like the watermarks left in a filthy bath, which would match this, we suddenly get accumulating at compound interest, and it throws us off ever so slightly into the world of professionalism. It's the professional world. Compound interest belongs to the bankers. And who oversees monetary affairs? Well, if you've read the book, you will know this book is about the law. Now, with that in mind, just check a few things out about the style that he puts into the writing here. You may not have noticed it. A normal rendition of this writing should be, if it's just a storytelling exercise, it was London at Michaelmas term. Oh no, or it was London and Michaelmas term was lately over, and the Lord Chancellor blah blah blah. Okay. You don't start with implacable November weather as a statement of a sentence. You would say the November weather was implacable. The and was are put in. But this is stating things in bullet point form. London. Michaelmas term lately over. Implacable weather. Tick that off. As much mud in the streets as if water's newly retired. Smoke lowering down from chimney pots. Dogs, indistinguishable in mire. Horses, scarcely better. Foot passengers. There's a ticking off of lists. Can you see that? Why is he done it this way? It's because he's designing a scene. It's a scene of not happiness, sort of misery, discomfort, a place where people don't want to be, and then it's written in an almost legal format. Like a checklist, as if you're going through the minutes of a courtroom. Do you see how brilliant that style of writing is? Dickens is a master. If you want to start your book and think of creating atmosphere and creating tone, Dickens is one of the best people you can ever look at, and this is how it's done. So let's move on to another one. We're going to look at quite a number, and the more you look at, the more you'll appreciate the skills involved in literature. But by sticking to just one author, what we're able to do is to really hone in on a particular style. So let's move on to our next one. By the way, if you're enjoying this sort of analysis of literature that we're doing in this video, and you want to get into the classics and go deeper, make sure to go and check out my Patreon, because on the Patreon, we as a community read one classic book a month, which I give an in-depth review to at the end of the month, a full video going into some of the ideas of that book. I also add other videos through two other videos through the month to do with literature or the background of the book or the background of the author or some historical events. And it just helps grow your knowledge and the vista of your mind when it comes to exploring literature. And you'll be exploring literature along with me as I learn, you'll learn as well, and I'd love to have people's input on it. It's a great community that's growing there. Anyway, back to some Dickens. So here we've got the wonderful little Dorrit. And what little Dorrit will discuss, you'll never get this from the opening paragraph, but this is Dickens' attack on the debtor's prison and incarceration itself, how awful it is. So you think in times of criminal reform, because we know Dickens was very much into reforming society and not brutalizing people. So let's just read how Little Dorrit opens. 30 years ago, Marseille lay burning in the sun one day. A blazing sun upon a fierce August day was no greater rarity in southern France than at any other time before or since. Everything in Marseille and about Marseille had stared at the fervid sky and been stared at in return until a staring habit had become universal there. Strangers were stared out of countenance by staring white houses, staring white walls, staring white streets, staring tracts of arid road, staring hills from which verdure was burnt away. The only things to be seen not fixedly staring and glaring were the vines, drooping under their load of grapes. These did occasionally wink a little, as the hot air barely moved the faint leaves. What atmosphere do you get from this? Now that we're particularly honing in on it, you probably noticed a few things. Noticeably, the biggest repetition of words is staring. Look at how many starings are there? Staring habit, stared at in return, stared at the sky, staring hills. The only thing that wasn't staring. Right, look at that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times he mentions staring in a single paragraph. This is something Dickens actually does quite a lot. In Bleak House, which we looked at earlier, we see sort of repetitions of ideas to do with dirt, mud, smoke, all that slipping, sliding. But the next paragraph, he mentions the word fog 16 times. If you remember Great Expectations, we had Philip, Pirip, Pip, Pip, Pip. A repeat. I've deliberately made the popping noise, by the way, to emphasize the ip noise. Sounds create tones. Words, when repeated, create an atmosphere. And that's critical with this. What's the atmosphere that you get from this? Do you find it is stultifying? You know, it's oppressively hot. Because we've had the word stare, and a stare is something unbroken, isn't it? Unbroken and unceasing. We've had it linked with Marseille lay burning in the sun. On the first reading, you may have thought it was actually on fire, but it's not. Just one day. Okay, so this little comment, one day, this is significant. I look at that and I think it's so innocuous. It's so everyday in its meaning. You know, we're just picking any old day. Now, for most people, not every day is oppressive, but we're going to have linked here just one day being oppressive as if it's the most normal thing, because it says, you know, it's not a rarity for the blazing sun to be over southern France. Like everything in Marseille, you know, it's always been the same. And then we have how the blazing sun stares. Everything is staring. It's almost as if nothing can move. It's just hanging limp underneath the sheer heat. Notice when there's an attempt to bring in vegetation, verdure was burnt away. This is one of those hot, oppressive days. And the vines, yes, they've got grapes, but they're drooping, they wilt under the heat. And although they wink a little, that means the light flickers slightly because the leaves might move. It's just the hot air barely move their faint leaves. And look at that, they're faint leaves. That's not the colour, that's that they're limp and drying out. It can't hold itself up because it's tired and exhausted. Now this will now go on to actually spending more time in the town, explaining how hot things are, and in the church where it's a bit cooler because of the archways, the stone archways. And then you've got some men in a prison, and even through a keyhole, just that shaft of light is like a burning shaft that comes through. And so you have the perfect setup of being trapped, stuck, fixed in place. Do you see that? What a great way to get the environment. It's a way that we feel it. You know, show, don't tell. We feel that this is a day of, we're trapped. This is oppressive. It's unbearable. We recognize it. What an excellent way to open up. A lot of books will start, you know, with the classic in media res. The man was running down the street, footsteps were behind him, and that pulls us in. But what this does is Dickens actually gives us a tone for the book. This is a tone that will rear its head all the way through. The sense of being under oppressive, persecutory heat of being stuck in place, unable to get out, lacking vigor, lacking energy. That's what you'll get through this book, and the opening paragraph sets us up for that scene. Our next book is Our Mutual Friend. Now, Our Mutual Friend is a mystery book by Dickens, and how I wish Dickens had lived longer than he did. I think he died when he was 56, because this is a later book, and he's moving off from just social causes and social commentary to murder mysteries. His friend Wilkie Collins, of course, The Woman in White, The Moonstone, No Name, Armandale. You know, he was a great writer of mystery. And Dickens began doing it. If he only had lived longer, who knows what he would have written. But let's just look at how he creates atmosphere. This is Dickens' thing. He creates atmosphere and tone all the time in the beginning of his books. So here we are. In these times of ours, though concerning the exact year there is no need to be precise, a boat of dirty and disreputable appearance with 2 figures in it floated on the Thames between Southwark Bridge, which is of iron, and London Bridge, which is of stone, as an autumn evening was closing in. The figures in the boat were those of a strong man with ragged, grizzled hair and a sun-browned face, and a dark girl of 19 or 20, sufficiently like him to be recognisable as his daughter. The girl rowed, pulling a pair of sculls very easily. The man, with the rudder line slack in his hands and his hands loose in his waistband, kept an eager lookout. He had no net, hook, or line, and he could not be a fisherman. His boat had no cushion for a sitter, no paint, no inscription, no appliance beyond a rusty boat hook and a coil of rope, and he could not be a waterman. His boat was too crazy and too small to take in cargo for delivery, and he could not be a lighterman or river carrier. There was no clue to what he looked for, but he looked for something with the most intent and searching gaze. The tide, which had turned an hour before, was running down, and his eyes watched every little race and eddy in its broad sweep as the boat might slight headway against it, or drove stern foremost before it, according as he directed his daughter by a movement of his head. She watched his face as earnestly as he watched the river, but in the intensity of her look there was a touch of dread or horror. How atmospheric was that? It was atmosphere, wasn't it? All over. Look how he achieves it. If you're writing, there's so many good lessons to take out of this. First of all, he doesn't, as much as you think, oh, he's setting a scene and it's descriptive, notice he doesn't paint hardly any backdrop. The exact year, there's no need to be precise. I'm not going to get sidetracked by that. I'm not going to waste words at the opening. He then gets a boat of dirty and disreputable appearance. This intrigues us straight away. There's something about this word disreputable. A dirty boat would have been common back then, although it does smack of dilapidation, which is going to add to something like crime. But disreputable, this catches us. And he doesn't say with a man and woman in it, or a father and his daughter. He says 2 figures, because figures is mysterious. Noticeably, it makes a play on this word then. Whether he deliberately did this, I don't know, but it seems to fit. 2 figures floated on the Thames. So yes, it's in a boat, but also 2 figures floating is mysterious, almost paranormal, ghostly, isn't it? But he doesn't yet give us who the 2 figures are. This is, you might think that's insignificant because we're going to find out in just another sentence. It's not. This phrase, 2 figures, makes it just that much more intriguing as to what we're reading to take us on further in the story. This is a quality example of just how to lead a reader from one line to the next. Okay? And then he gives us the Thames between Southwark, which is a bridge of iron, and a bridge of stone. You know, it's got modernity in it, being as it's a bridge of iron. This gives us a little idea as to the exact year. It's not like right back in the 18th century, for instance, when Pip, late 18th century, in Great Expectations was, or early 19th. You know, you've got the iron and the stone. This is London as people know it. And then it says, as an autumn evening was closing in. Now this can be very trite, the phrase closing in. Lots of people talk about night is closing in. It's not trite the way he uses it here. Look at it. Dirty, disreputable, two figures floated, closing in. That's all mystery. You know, that's worthy of Wilkie Collins himself. But now we'll go a bit further and we get drawn more and more into the mystery of it. We begin to get introduced to our characters, which is so important because we want to meet people straight away. We want an idea to sort of start judging them by, but we want mystery because that's what the book is about. So he always sets this atmosphere of the whole book in his opening paragraphs. The figures, because we asked the question back here, oh, what two figures are they? The figures were a strong man with ragged, grizzled hair, disreputable and dirty. Okay, ragged and grizzled. He's not well-to-do. Grizzled adds to the raggedness a certain ferocity, doesn't it? So we'll put that there. We've got ferocity here. There's something uneasy about this guy. Feral, maybe, is another good word that we could use. And then we've got a dark girl, so swarthy. She's exposed to the sun. So again, this is going to be of poorer origin because, you know, the whiter your skin back then, that was what you looked for in a woman, apparently. And you could tell they were recognizable as his daughter. I like this word. On first look, I didn't pay attention, but going through it again, recognizable. There's a distinction between the two. They act in a slightly different way to one another, but you could tell it was his daughter on close look. Okay. The girl rowed. That's interesting because normally you would imagine the man rowing. She pulls a pair of sculls very easily. So we know she's a grafter. We know she works with her father a lot. It gives us the idea that she's frequently to be found on this river with her father performing some strange, floating, mysterious, closing in atmosphere. And then he is on an eager lookout. Now, who is on eager lookouts in life? Well, the police, soldiers, the law. Except we know it can't be that because this guy is disreputable. This guy is ragged and grizzled. Now he's on the lookout. Of course, he could be on the lookout for a missing person, someone that's fallen in the water. He could be on the lookout for a briefcase that's fell over. He could be on the lookout for anything. But because of these words here, the sufficiently recognizable, you know, it gives this criminal element. And so this automatically feels as if something criminal is happening. And yet there is nothing to say that criminality is taking place. But we feel it. And then mystery is added. Look at how the mystery is done. And again, Dickens uses rhetoric here. This is a skill which you should use if you're writing. If you want to build tension, if you want to build any kind of atmosphere, repetition is key. He had no net, hook or line. He could not be a fisherman. Check this out. He could not be a fisherman. Now he repeats the pattern. His boat had no cushion, sitter, paint or inscription or appliance. Okay? No net, hook, line, no this, that and the other. So he could not be a waterman. His boat was too crazy, too small to take cargo for delivery. He could not be a lighterman or river carrier. There was no clue to what he looked for, but he looked for something with a most intent and searching gaze. Look at that. No clue. This gives us the criminal detective element. Intent, searching gaze. They're looking for something. We can't see what they're looking for because we have no clue. He can't see what he's looking for, but he does know. And now we're curious. We're hooked by this guy. And, you know, we follow his eyes watching every little race and eddy. And then right at the end, it says that she was watching him as earnestly as he watched the river. The difference is she has a touch of dread or horror. And this adds to this grizzled, ragged man. So who is it? We already feel we have entered London's underworld. And whatever he's looking for is either ill-gotten gains or maybe something more worrying like a dead body. How about that? I mean, that is a masterpiece. In fact, if you really want to look at a brilliant way of opening a book and building mystery, I'd recommend you just rewind this by 10 minutes or so, well, about 8 minutes, and just go through that again, or do it yourself and really focus in on the atmosphere and feeling that you've got. How close is his face to the water, by the way, do you think, in your mind? I find him very close, leaning over almost. Okay, so how do I know that, or why do I think that when it's not said here? Because the words that are chosen deliberately by Dickens give me that feeling. Now, you might think I'm overdoing it by giving you more examples. I'm not going to give you all 13 of his main books, but half of them. And it's because I know a lot of you really, really want to dig in. And the more you can repeat a situation, repeat an activity, the better you get at it. So with me, see what you spot. What atmosphere do you get here? Really about our character, our main character. So this is Dombey and Son, another absolutely fantastic book by Dickens. Some great characters in this. So, Dombey sat in the corner of the darkened room in the great armchair by the bedside, and Son lay tucked up warm in a little basket bedstead, carefully disposed on a low settee immediately in front of the fire and close to it, as if his constitution were analogous to that of a muffin, and it was essential to toast him brown while he was very new. Dombey was about 48 years of age, Son about 48 minutes. Dombey was rather bald, rather red, and though a handsome, well-made man, too stern and pompous in appearance to be prepossessing. Son was very bald and very red, and though, of course, an undeniably fine infant, somewhat crushed and spotty in his general effect as yet. On the brow of Dombey, time and his brother Care had set some marks, as on a tree that was to come down in good time. Remorseless twins they are for striding through their human forests, notching as they go. While the countenance of Son was crossed and recrossed with 1,000 little creases, which the same deceitful time would take delight in smoothing out and wearing away with the flat part of his scythe, as a preparation of the surface for his deeper operations. Dombey, exulting in the long-looked-for event, jingled and jingled the heavy gold watch chain that depended from below his trim blue coat, whereof the buttons sparkled phosphorescently in the feeble rays of the distant fire. Son, with his little fists curled up and clenched, seemed, in his feeble way, to be squaring at existence for having come upon him so unexpectedly. I mean, this is just fabulous. Now, I guess that probably the first thing you noticed about this is this repetition of Dombey, Son. This contrasting Dombey, Son. Dombey, Son. Dombey, Son. Dombey, Son. You notice that? This is something we find regularly with Dickens, a rhetorical repetitious device, a contrast. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times in the opening he refers to Dombey and Son, which is the name of the book as well. So we are told at the beginning that Dombey and Son are inextricably linked. The perspective comes from the father toward the son. We get that because of the laying up of the situation. We find Dombey is in the corner, so he's always placed first in the great armchair. I just want you to notice this word, great, okay? It's quite important. And then the Son is tucked up with this typical Dickensian way of describing things. He's put close to the fire as if his constitution were analogous to that of a muffin, and it was essential to toast him brown when he was very new. This tells us a little bit that Dombey has had him put in this situation to take care of him. Dombey is very interested in the welfare of his son. There is sort of an insinuation maybe that he's fragile here because he's related to a muffin. Now that could be he's fragile, he hasn't got the constitution of someone who sits in a great armchair, or it could just be the silliness of Dombey, looking after this new boy, being too particular about something. Then we've got this repetition. It's not just Dombey and Son, but Dombey was 48 years of age and Son was 48 minutes. So there is a reflection. Dombey and Son. Dombey and Son. Dombey was bald and red, and he was handsome but too stern, so he couldn't be perfectly good looking. The Son was very bald and very red, and but he was crushed and spotty. So they're both slightly defective, but they're both very similar to one another. We find we're building a family, we're building a dynasty here, Dombey and Son. Time and care both work on Dombey and Son. For Dombey, time and care, again, this is interesting. It emphasizes this unity of Dombey and Son because time and his brother care. Now, of course, Dombey is father and Son is son, but it's still this family, filial affection, this family bind. And while time has worn away Dombey's good looks, making him older, Son, it says, time has got to smooth him out and make him non-wrinkly before it can make him wrinkly. In other words, Son is supposed to get older and eventually grow old. Time's over all of us. However, you don't get the sense that... Yeah, well, I'll change my mind. I'll change my comment there. What you get is a link between Dombey and Son and time. This gives us dynasty. It's a dynastic kind of feel. There's a link through time with the Dombey and Son. Because we don't get Dombey's first name nor Son's first name, this could be repeated constantly through any age. Dombey and Son, Dombey and Son. Do you see how that works? Because of time. But time will conquer them both. However, is this insinuating Dombey and Son as an institution could outdo time and care? Who knows? It's certainly, you know, we've got this word great, okay, regarding Dombey, and we've also got stern, pompous. Gives us this idea that maybe he feels he's above time and care. And he commands things. Even his son is a muffin, okay? Look at this word regarding Dombey again. Exulting. Exultant, you know, it could be, you think of a bride and groom on their wedding day, they exult. But frequently we put exultant to a great festival, a great celebration. So sort of royal. And that fits this great armchair, doesn't it? He's exulting. Long looked for event. And then jingled and jingled. This long looked for, by the way, tells us that he's been wanting a son. Okay, he wants a son. We are again talking about dynasty. Then he jingles and jingles the heavy gold watch. This is the sound of money. You'll notice the repetition again. Dickens does this all the time. Heavy gold watch. Oh, chain. Not just gold. Heavy gold. The word depended, which can just mean hangs, also means dependence, which actually comes from if we depend upon someone, we hang upon their strength or we require them to hold us. But it has another meaning, doesn't it? Son, people depend on Dombey. He is a protector. He is the great patriarch of his family. And his buttons sparkle phosphorescently. It's a magnificent expression when it's contrasted to feeble rays of the distant fire. Here's the question, though. Who have we been constantly comparing? Dombey, Son, Dombey, Son, Dombey, Son. And suddenly, Dombey, this is about to be followed by Son, and we've just had sparkled phosphorescently and feeble rays. Well, of course, Son is a baby. The Son has a constitution like a muffin. So he's not as great as Dombey, but could this tell us, and time and care is going to work on him, is this tell us something about maybe the situation of Son's life when he grows up? Maybe he's going to fall short of Dombey. Maybe he's not going to be as great as him. And it does seem to suggest that he's got fists curled up and clenched in his, look at this, feeble way. Now, this could have been a mighty baby. Even though he's only a baby, it could have been, and he was born ready to take on the world, which would have been, you know, flattering. But feeble ways squaring at existence for having come upon him so unexpectedly. This Son doesn't quite, we get an underlying idea that Dombey is proud of Son. Dombey wants to create a dynasty. Dombey is all about the name. Son may not fit up to Dombey. Or maybe he will, but there's just something under this that seems to lend the idea of disappointment. and it's brilliantly done. And our focus is forced to realise Dombey is placing a lot of expectation on this newborn boy because of Dombey and Son. In fact, 2 paragraphs later, you find him holding the baby and just saying over and over again, Dombey and Son, Dombey and Son. And all of this atmosphere sets us uneasily regarding, it gives us that sense of unease regarding the fate and fortune that Dombey is expecting from having this boy. Let's move on to one last one. I said one last one. There's actually 2 here, but you'll see they're quite short. So, quickly going through David Copperfield. Whether I shall turn out to be the hero of my own life, or whether that station will be held by anybody else, these pages must show. To begin my life with the beginning of my life, I record that I was born, as I've been informed and believe, on a Friday at 12 o'clock at night. It was a remark that the clock began to strike and I began to cry simultaneously. In consideration of the day and hour of my birth, it was declared by the nurse and by some sage women in the neighbourhood who had taken a lively interest in me several months before there was any possibility of our becoming personally acquainted, first, that I was destined to be unlucky in life, and secondly, that I was privileged to see ghosts and spirits, both these gifts inevitably attaching, as they believed, to all unlucky infants of either gender born towards the small hours on a Friday night. That is beautiful. You might find that there's something reminiscent of Philip Pirrip here. This I was born, as I've been informed and believe. Okay, it's a bit like him because Philip, this is David Copperfield, chapter 1, called David Copperfield the Younger. So again, a Bildungsroman. But there's a little more, it's not so much naivety. There's a little more, what's the word? Personal interest here. Will I be the hero of my own life? We are set with a question that we want the answer to. It's very hard, well, it's actually impossible for the human mind to hear a question and not answer it. Did you know that? You see, you just mentally answered that question. This, will I be the hero of my own life? Oh, will he? It gets you to read the next bit. Okay? These pages must show. So to begin my life, look how fast he's moved in. And it's something innocuous, but we like to have a background set. And we get given a curious element. Born on Friday, which, you know, naturally Friday the 13th and all that kind of business. Friday's always unfairly assumed to be a day of woe. At 12 o'clock at night. What a specific time. How uncanny to be born exactly at midnight. And it was remarked that the clock began to strike and I began to cry simultaneously. Is this the link between him and time? Is it a link between him and destiny and the fates? This linking of the clock and his cry. And then we have the added mystery and enchantment and the alluring pull into the book of superstition and mystery, because it says that the nurse declared, and sage women, that I was destined to be unlucky in life. Oh, we do like hearing about people's bad luck. Also, I was privileged to see ghosts and spirits. Really? So there's a bit of eeriness, that preternatural element, which we're going to be like, well, is that going to happen? Now, one paragraph later, he says that's not true. He says, unless I got all my visions when I was young and I forgot, I'm still waiting to get this inheritance of seeing ghosts. So showing that there's old wives' tales and things. What a great painting of the world he now grows up in. I mean, it's just beautiful. He has actually, in these 2 paragraphs, introduced himself, given us an idea of what his life will entail, given us the background neighbourhood that he grows up in. And the fact that he's writing this, well, he didn't deny that the destiny of unluckiness was wrong, if you were to read the next paragraph. That pulls you right in. That is a genius bit of writing. Isn't it lovely when you just stop to look at the wording, the phrasing of everything? And we get a doubling up as well, which we not as classic as the other ones, not as obvious, but Friday at 12 o'clock at night, clock and cry. Okay, so the time and activity there's an echoing here. Will I be the hero or will someone else? Contrast. And then you've got this double thing with the nurse and the sage women with their two predictions. It just gives a weight. It gives a depth of reality when more than one thing is said. Would I be lucky in life? Let's find out. Wouldn't be anywhere near as good. I was destined to be unlucky in life. That's one thing. And to see ghosts. It just gives depth. It's like using stock in your cooking. It takes the flavours deeper. Let's just scroll up very quickly to this simple paragraph on hard times. An unusual one for Dickens in that he starts in media res, so activity, because he's starting with someone talking. Now, you're going to spot what Dickens loves doing. After we've gone through all these other ones, you're going to spot this immediately. Now, what I want is facts. Teach these boys and girls nothing but facts. Facts alone are wanted in life. Plant nothing else and root out everything else. You can only form the minds of reasoning animals upon facts. Nothing else will ever be of any service to them. This is the principle on which I bring up my children, and this is the principle on which I bring up these children. Stick to facts, sir. What's the obvious thing in here that we're supposed to see? Facts, facts, facts. Let's see, what else have we got here? Facts. So we've got 5 facts, and we've got something akin to it, which is principle twice. I mean, we are told everything about this character immediately. This is an unromantic character. Very quickly you'll find he's utilitarian. It's all about, you know, science and education over humanity. Why do we know that? Because animals, brute animals, the minds of reasoning animals, well, you can't teach a shark facts. So this must be referring to humans, but he calls them animals. So this is an inhumane way of dealing with it. And if you know anything about hard times, it is an attack on the doctrine of utilitarianism. Okay, which is happiness comes from utility. Society should be organized on utility, people being productive. He ridicules later in the book that all workers in factories are called hands, as if only the hands matter, the person doesn't. Where is the place for romance and poetry and art and beauty? He says, plant nothing else but facts, root out everything else. We have the tone of the character, and we have the tone of the whole book in just this opening. It's like a thesis that the strong villain is going to have in the book, and he embodies the view of the merchant and upper class societies, and then Dickens is going to attack it for the rest of the book. So I hope you enjoyed that run through of, what was it, 7 of Charles Dickens' openings in 7 of his books. Did you notice how to identify style? You see, style is the unique way that one author chooses to express themselves, bring themselves into the narrative. And you could find very similar features there through all of the openings, which are particular to Dickens. And what's great about knowing that is, if you want to get a Dickensian vibe in your writing at times, well, now you know how he does it. You could get that vibe by imitating the elements that he introduces. We also learn a particular way to start a book. His books don't really start with much action. We had Hard Times, which is in the middle of action, with the guy talking nothing but facts. We had Our Mutual Friend, which starts with the 2 figures floating on the Thames River looking for something. But overall, you find with Dickens that he sets us up either the character and their disposition, like Pip and David Copperfield, or we get an idea that's sort of a premise that's going to be developed through the book. For instance, the hot atmosphere of Little Dorrit is this oppressive environment. And that's what Dickens often does. He brings environment forward, which almost becomes symbolic of the institutions he's going to take on. So with Little Dorrit, it was debtor's prison. Bleak House, we got that murky, dirty, dark environment. The next paragraph, which we didn't look at, is full of fog, because it's confusing in the law courts, and it becomes symbolic of the institution he's going to take apart. He is a master at atmosphere and backdrop. So that was just Charles Dickens. I will do, as time goes on, I'll do more of these authors and different aspects of the book. Please, 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 if you love classic literature, subscribe. And if you want to go deeper into the classics, check out my Patreon, where I make 3 exclusive videos a month for my Patreons. So until the next time, I wish you joy in whatever you are reading.